Thank you for joining us today. Today we're going to talk about NIS2. But before we do that, just let me quickly talk about a workshop that's coming up. I know that it's in XPlained, and normally in XPlained it's vendor agnostic. So I promise no more advertising after these slides, but I do think it is very relevant with today's topic. Just a quick questions for you. If you get audited today, and they ask you that questions, right? How many Windows hosts do you have? Who can honestly say that they will get a right answer? And you will see that with NIS2, and more specific, the guidelines by the CCP will lean on the NIS framework. So identify, and like any other framework, it starts with identify and discover your security gaps. That's what we will do in this workshop. So please do check out this landing page. It's a free workshop. It doesn't matter if you're a partner or an end user. We may be exclusive networks, but we are inclusive to all. So feel free to subscribe. I would love to see you there. It's a very cool workshop about CASM. All right, quick introduction. My name is Stan van Hof. I'm a business development manager at Exclusive Networks. I've been with the company since 2017, which means I'm almost 6 years at a company now. Started out as a pre-sale, so I do have a technical background, and I moved to the commercial team 3 years ago. 9 years in IT security. My main focus is on emerging technology and evangelizing the channel. But enough about me. Let's talk about NIS2. So quickly, where are we now? Last year, the EU agreed on what NIS2 directive would look like. So important to know is that directives lay down certain results that must be achieved, but each member state is free to decide how to transpose directives into national laws. That's why it takes a long time for a directive become a part of a national law. And we should use this time really to educate ourselves and follow the guidelines of the CCP. And the fact that you are following this session means you're already educating yourself, so that's a very good start. So every member state has time until October 2024 to make sure it's a part of their national legislation. This is still not the case, so there's nothing definitive at this point. However, the CCP's advisory role in this gives you a very good idea on what companies will need to do to be compliant. So again, take this time, educate yourself. We still have some time left, but it's good to start right now. A quick recap, what was NIS originally, actually. Like we saw in the past, a directive, before it becomes legislation, takes a long time. But back then, with the original NIS, you were identified as an operator of essential service. So you were notified that you should be able to comply to NIS1. So that's a big difference with NIS2 already. The NIS focuses on 7 sectors, and it was actually the first cyber security legislation in the world, where the focus was on the increased EU cooperation. And also to enforce those security measures. There was a minimum at security measures. And if there was an incident, you were obligated to report that. So that was NIS1. Why do we need an updated version? Well, because actually the 3 pillars remain the same after all. First of all, the intention of national governments. National governments have to pay attention to cybersecurity. Not every country in the EU is or was on the same level of cybersecurity. So there's a certain need of a baseline that we all have to have. And those countries will help each other because of the strengthened European cooperation among cybersecurity authorities. The third pillar is risk management. And it's the main operators in the key industries of our society to take security measures and report incidents. The cyber threats have significantly increased, and we are getting more dependent on the digital domain. And to address this, the EU increased the scope and brought more clarity, not only in scoping, but also in needed security measurements, enforcement, and overall communication of incidents. So what is NIS2? Like we mentioned, the directive is already published, but it still takes some time before it will be part of the legislation by the end of October 2024 at latest. You will have some few months to actually comply after that, but it's a good thing to start already. You as a company will have to register yourself based on the given criteria, which we'll explain later, but those criteria are based on the sectors that you work with, the size of your company, and the revenue that you do. Your management will be accountable for security measures they need to take. So if your management is not doing their job, they're personal accountable. Also, you can take all the precautions in the world. That doesn't mean there won't be an incident. We all know that. But if that happens, you are obligated to report that with strict rules. The scope of the 7 sectors of NIS, they still apply with NIS2 in place. So it doesn't mean that there's a new scope. No, we just widen the scope. So we can all see the examples here with healthcare, transport, energy, water supply, so digital service providers, banking, financial, although that is still, DORA is still applicable for that part, and digital infrastructure. Oh, my bad. With NIS2, we increase the scope. Okay, so every sector from NIS1 still applies, and additional to healthcare, it's no longer just for hospitals, but also includes medical labs, medical devices, or any pharmaceutical-related company, actually. But okay, new sectors, which include network providers, everything about water management, manufacturing of critical goods, chemical goods, stuff like that, food providers, those who handle food, data center and digital services, aerospace, postal and courier services, and public administration. If you take all those sectors together, we are coming from what before the scope of 100 companies to over 2,500 companies. So a lot of companies will be obligated to comply to NIS2. What is the impact for your organization if that happens? Well, first of all, are you a part of those sectors? And if so, what is your revenue and your size? That will give you an idea about what category of company you are. We're going to go more in detail about that later. But okay, so that's the passive selection part. Then I'm going to talk about your management responsibility, because if you need to comply, what are the consequences? As a manager, you have to make sure you take the right risk and security measurements. And if there's something happens, instant reporting. But what happens if you don't comply? Well, you can be audited and fined. So we're going to also go into details about that. First of all, the passive selection. Unlike in this one, you will need to register yourself if you fit the criteria. So that's based on the sector you're in or subsector, your number of employees, and the revenue you do as a company. So based on those 3 criteria, you will be put in a certain category. That category could be, most important is essential, then important, or small and micro. So based on that category, you will be obligated to do certain security measurements, but also difference in fines and some other stuff. I've added an overview at the end of the slide deck together with our sources. You can get a copy after the session. But to have more detail about how the passive selection works. But what is important, you need to register yourself online. It's like tax on web, it's the same look and feel, but you as a company should register yourself online, and that's the first step. The second step is, as a management, what are your responsibilities? First of all, you will need to allocate the necessary and correct budget and resources to approve certain risk management measures you have to take. And not only saying we need to do this, but also oversee that it actually is happening, because you are personally reliable if you neglect your tasks. So that's very important. Also, as management, you are personally liable. So please make sure you educate your people. Make sure there are trainings available for security awareness sessions, phishing campaigns, continuous trainings for the people so they know how to handle when you get a phishing email or when you get a call or on WhatsApp or whatever that attackers are today using to get inside an organization, because phishing is still a major attack vector. So training your people for that is very important. So offer proper training, and please learn by lead by example, and make sure you follow also a proper training. This is a cool headliner. It's really in your face. There's a guy in prison. So what's the story about this? Well, it's interesting because this is about how a CISO handled the breach. And as you can see, he did that so well. And the result of his badge management was that a judge sentenced Joe Sullivan, the former CISO at Uber, for 3 years probation and 200 hours of community service. This was because he was covering up a cyber attack back in 2016 from authorities, and he was even obstructing a federal investigation. Of course, this is not only neglected it, but he made mistakes, and he even he violated a lot of different federal laws. So there's a reason they went after him. But I think this is very important. This will impact CISOs. CISO is already a stressful job. We see a lot of burnouts with CISOs, and this also comes up for extra pressure. So a CISO will also want to cover his ass and make sure that he gets budget and support from his C-suite. So if you talk about risk management in cyber, let's focus on the first one, is the annual supply chain risk assessment. Risk management is a very wide topic, and annual supply chain risk is very important, this one. Why? Because you will need to make an assessment of all the third parties you work with. This is a very important step in the chain. A little story about this, how Albert Heijn, so it's a store, didn't have any cheese or almost no cheese at all for more than 3 weeks. So the story about that, it was that a major cheese supplier of Albert Heijn was breached and had a ransomware attack, which meant that production and transport was down. This was embarrassing for the supplier, but also for Albert Heijn because they had empty shelves. They realized it was a big risk to be so dependent from one supplier. So that's the whole thing. Okay, what's my risk with my supplier? But also, Albert Heijn had top-notch security, but that doesn't mean that all your suppliers have the same level of security. And we see this more and more, that the bigger companies are also asking for some form of cybersecurity compliance as a criteria for working together. So the scope now with NIS2 may be 2,500 companies, but those companies will also ask their suppliers to be compliant. So those companies also need to invest. So the real scope and the real impact is much bigger than only 2,500 companies. To talk about the different roles your employees have with their responsibilities and clearly defined who is authorized for what and why, this should be all well documented. The same for all the risk. Every risk that there is should be documented and also approved. In that way, your management can say, oh, we didn't know that was happening. You will need to use threat intel. So the EU really wants that the cooperation between all different national authorities, but also between private companies, really gets to the next level. So using threat intel, there's a lot of free threat intelligence out there. You can also buy it from vendors, if you want it in a more automated way. But there's a lot of intel out there, and the whole idea is that we cooperate better together. And know your assets. I can't stress enough how important that is. You cannot see what you can protect. You cannot protect what you can't see. So make sure you have all those assets, list those vulnerabilities, try to patch them if possible. If not, identify those vulnerabilities because that's a risk. Know that the environment changes all the time. There's not something you can do in Excel. There are dedicated tools to help you with that, but more on that later. Now, all security measures, awareness and training. This is important, right? Education is one. People are still the first line of defense. Educate them, give them proper training, not only through platforms with technology, but also training by people. People listen better to people than to a computer anyway. Also, technical security measures. We can implement a lot of security, like a ton of different vendors and technologies. So where do you start? Well, first of all, the CCB documented this very well for small companies, but even for the bigger one or even enterprises, what they need. I think basic firewalling and segmentation is absolutely necessary. We can go further than that. You can go to MFA on critical assets, baseline network behavior. So there's a ton of technical measures we can implement, but more on that later. Governance is a broad term, but it's very important in the part of NIS2 because well-documented rules and structure is key to the road of compliance. And that road to compliance can help be built with the help of existing frameworks, right? We're going to talk more about that, but there is a big overlap, for example, with ISO 27001. If you're on a better certification, think about using an automated tool. According to Drata, 41% of businesses without continuous compliance reports slow down on the sales cycle as a result. Compliance should help you. It shouldn't be a burden on all departments, If you go in full manual way, it will be a burden on all departments. And of course, proportional. We can expect that every company spends its entire budget to cybersecurity. And you can't expect a small transport company to buy millions of SIEM data retention. That's just not feasible. So it has to be proportional compared to the company itself. And now incident reporting. You're breached. Okay, what now? First of all, within the first 24 hours that you notice the breach. So there's a big difference about when you are actually breached and when you notice the breach. And that's what we call the dwell time. Of course, you can only call in that you're breached once you notice your breach. So your breach, what's next? Okay, make a call or email to the CERT with the first findings. That is very rough data, right? The first things you see. After 3 days, you should do an official notification, and you should have enough info to make an initial assessment about the impact and be able to share the IOCs. Again, a lot of pressure from the EU here is on sharing that intel, because if you get in breached, some other companies within your vertical, within your sector are also getting breached. So that's why it's important to share those IOCs. There's not something that any IT engineer, security engineer can do. There are a lot of companies to help you with incident response. Yeah, make sure you address one of those companies to help you with incident response cases. After a month, you have to fill in a full report about the incident. Again, more detail about an incident, the more we can share with each other, the more we can learn from it. That's the whole idea of it. And in the past, there was like a shame if you were breached and you did something wrong. I think that with the breach of the SolarWinds attack of FireEye 2 years ago, actually stated that it's how you handle a breach that's important, not if you're breached. If you did everything well, you can still be breached. That's possible. It's how you go with that after it. Right? Are you sharing information? Are you being open and honest in your communication? That is how you should handle a breach. Not like Uber tried to hide it and then even don't work at all with the government. So this is how the incident reporting could look like. It's still a work in progress, but with the CERT, then you can report an incident and give some more details. So it's a structured way already for you to report an incident. You reported an incident, okay, that's great. You won't be fined if you report an incident and you did it in a good way. You will be fined if you didn't do what was necessary to be compliant. So that's a big difference. It's like with GDPR. So there's a lot of talks with fines. It was the same when GDPR came in place. And depending on the category, this could be 10 million or 2% of your annual revenue, or 7 million or 1.4% of your annual revenue. Either way, it's a lot of money. You will need to be compliant with security audits, implementation of policies, and so on. The biggest difference is that essential companies must be able to provide the information at all time. So before that there's an incident and after an incident, of course. While important companies should only be able to do that after an incident. But in either way, if you're audited or not, if after an incident they want that information, you should have that already. So if only after the incident you're gonna do security scans or audits, it's too late anyway. So both the essential as important should do all those different type of measurements. This is now the time for all the salespeople to really try to get everything out of the NIS2 framework. Okay, let's say to people, buy now and be compliant. That's why I always use this meme, which I really like, is don't believe everything you read on the internet just because there's a picture with a quote next to it, Abraham Lincoln. There is no certification for NIS2, unlike ISO 27001. It's like GDPR in that sense. It's a legal requirement, and organizations must demonstrate their compliance to national authorities. There could be big fines for the C-suite as well for non-compliance. So that's like GDPR. NIS2 has some hefty regulatory reports requirements. Any significant incident that is identified must be reported to the authorities in a timely manner. SOC 2 and ISO do have incident reporting requirements, but not specifically to any national authority. So you can see there's a big overlap. Both ISO and NIS2 have pen testing and business continuity plan requirements. NIS2 seems to have more stringent continuous monitoring requirements than ISO or SOC 2. Aside from the above point, there's a lot of overlap between ISO and NIS2. So if you're already on that road to compliant, it's difficult to put a number on it, but I talked to different experts and the estimate is like an 80% overlap already. So if you're already compliant with ISO 27001, you're good to almost good to go, let's say it like that. Where do you start as an organization? Well, kudos to the CCB because they provided excellent documentation based on the NIS framework, but also mapped on CIS and ISO. The 5 pillars of the NIS framework are a solid foundation to start from. You can protect what you can't see, so identify is key in security, and you should move forward from that point. The CCB really has very good documentation. This document will give you a good foundation with a lot of controls and guidelines. Guidelines for smaller companies to start with, controls for verifying the controls. I would advise to use specific tools to do this, to verify the controls, both for verifying the controls with tools like Axonius with API integration. So you have real-time data about, okay, is this control being actually valid? So can I be sure that my information is valid and still on point? But if you're gonna use it for compliance, you should also use compliance tools that are automated, like Drata, for example. You will need to collect a lot of information which needs to be up to date, verified, and reported. Don't try to use Excel for this, you will get lost. And the environment is a living organism, it changes all the times. You need automated tools to do that. Because having evidence of policies being enforced is important. If you're gonna say, yeah, last year we enforced it and we checked it, that's a little too late. You need to make sure that this is automated, that you can really show the auditor this is being enforced at this moment. So sometimes they provide you a good solution. The CCB, for example, the first one, physical devices and systems used within the organizations are inventoried. They will even tell you what to do. They're gonna even tell you, okay, the use of an IT asset management tool could be considered. So for this specific task that they are controlled, they're gonna say, use an IT asset management tool, which is great. But for another one, for example, the data address is protected, consider encrypting sensitive data stored in the cloud. They're not gonna say how to do that. So that's up to you or to us if you want our help. Okay, how are you gonna make sure that data in the cloud is encrypted, and how are you going to verify it is encrypted when an application developer spins up new computables in the cloud? Are you sure that it's being compliant with whatever you're doing? So that's why we came up with the idea about mapping our technology to all those different measurements you have to take. So cybersecurity, the journey to NIS2, again, it's not by now be compliant, it's a journey. It will take time. You do have to make investments and stuff like that. We all know the security and maturity model. That could be complex and a little bit too much for a lot of companies to a path of better security. So I advise that, okay, if you already are very mature, this is great, but otherwise use those guidelines from the CCP. They offer very good support in this, and they have different documents for essential companies, important, small, and micro. Since the CCB is using NIST as a foundation for the guidelines, we focus with our portfolio on the first 4. Some solutions now are more focused on enterprise, but in general, if you have more than 500 employees and up, we can offer everything we have on our slides. But anyway, if you have a question, could this probably be good for us? Just ask us, we can help you with that. So first of all, the framework, the CCP framework, identify. We did this mapping for identify. This can be asset inventory for your on-prem devices, but also for software, all your SaaS solutions you're using. Asset vulnerabilities is also very popular. On average, know that there is 500 CVEs are being published each week, which means there are 500 potential broken code in software that can be exploited. It doesn't mean there are 500 exploits, but 500 CVEs means there is a big risk. you should have a way to prioritize this for your environment, because not in every environment will handle this the same priority. If it's publicly exposed or not, what part of the segment, what is priority for your environment to patch this. This should be automated with a lot of extra added information altogether. And that's why we see that asset management and asset vulnerability, it gets a lot of focus from, of course, new players, but also the old players that are in the game for a long time. They really focus or increasing their focus in this domain. And as you can see about cyber threat intelligence, almost every vendor we have in portfolio offers some great threat intel. Some do it for free, some ask a price. Depends on which vendor. We are yelling for years that assume breach, which is true, but that doesn't mean we don't focus on prevention. On the contrary, taking the necessary prevention actions will minimize impact on a breach. Identity is a new gold for attackers, right? It moves from on-prem to cloud and is becoming the most popular attack vector. So least privilege, MFA everywhere, and visibility has never been so important. The zero trust is a term we all know well. Unfortunately, we still see many breaches because of broken access control or poorly or unpatched devices. Firewalls and segmentations is a basic need for any organization with on-prem assets. But also education. We have platforms that offer a variety of training, but also our own made classrooms training that we can provide as exclusive. And wherever your data is at rest or in transit, it must be visible and protected. What do we mean with that? That if a company is not offering the right tools that the users need to collaborate and work together or with third parties, they will find a way to work together with other tools you don't have any visibility on. But you do want visibility and control over your data. So bring visibility on your shadow IT and provide a company control alternative so you still know where your data is, that it's protected wherever it travels. And I can't stress enough how trivial yet important asset management is. I've read dozens of incident reports and podcasts, and so many times the attacker came in through a device the IT team wasn't aware of. This is still so important. And DLP will also get more important. And thank God that the next-gen solutions can help with the most critical part, which is classifying, putting labels on your data. And thanks to AI, and okay, this is the first time I used it, after half an hour, it's the first time I used AI. But thanks to AI, we can really get there in an automated way. Labeling, for example, Mitscope can label your data with a certainty of 97%, which is kind of great because in most DLP projects, labeling was the most difficult part to go through. Still very important backups, right? Assume breach, you can be infected, and if shit hit the fan, you will have to restore your backup if anything goes wrong. So make sure you test your backups, that's a solution, and have it well documented and reviewed from time to time. Now the detect phase. From a technological perspective, it's cooler than prevention, and unfortunately very necessary. A lot of these technologies, they work on logging different type of information. It could be from endpoints, it could be user information, network. But the idea is let's find an anomaly and let's use AI. Damn, second time now, but let's use AI to find those anomalies and give you more information about what is happening on your network, on your endpoints, in your environment altogether. If you have all these different type of technologies installed, great. Now let's check how well are your detection processes working. You can use tools like Simulate to do that, which are great for automated pen testing and stuff like that. And that way you can see, okay, I've installed my firewalls on-prem, in the cloud, wherever you need to put your firewall. And that way you can see, is this well implemented? Did they make any policy changes that were not good? How is my segmentation still in place? How is my EDR responding? Stuff like that. And then the respond part, there are a few vendors who will also offer this as an MDR service to help you with investigation, but usually this is for an incident response team or for very specific companies who are specialized in incident response. It's a whole new game, incident response, looking at all the forensics, see what happened, maybe do reverse engineering of the malware, etc. What you should do after this session. Well, first of all, thanks for staying during the session, because I know it's not the most sexy topic, but it's necessary. And since there's more as 100 attendees still here, I think we're doing good. But just keep on reading, follow sessions, take a look at the cyber coalition, what they're doing. CCB is providing very well documentation, and you can really see how many controls you will need to achieve your goal, which is great. We talked about compliance today, not about security, because for me, that's not the same. Of course, if you do it all well, your security increases, but sometimes for some people, it's just checking the box. If you really want to minimize your risk, you should also check your coverage on the MITRE ATT&CK framework. We already did some sessions about the MITRE ATT&CK, so if you have any questions, please just ask or look at our YouTube channel. But if you're going to invest in new technology, this is the moment to also see, okay, how well am I able to defend against those attacks? Because being compliant is not the same as being secure. And if you're going to invest, you better two birds with one stone, be compliant and secure. If I take a look at our events page, because we're organizing a workshop that leverages MITRE together with Fortinet. Make the right investments, all right? If you choose to go for NIS certification, use proper tools for that. If you're serious about security, make sure you're able to identify your assets and vulnerabilities. And last but not least, come talk to us, to your partner, to the vendor, reach out. People would love to help you, but let's communicate together. That's what the EU wants, like cooperation with, through different organizations, different nation states, whatever. You will get the slide deck. Here are some of the sources that we used. And this one gives you more in detail about the sector, the amount of employees to become essential or important or small or micro. So you will get the slides after this one. So this is it from my end. Because anything more than 30 minutes about this topic, and you won't be able to remember the most important parts. So that's why we cut off at 30 minutes. If you have any questions, please put them in the chat box, or sorry, the question box, and we will be happy to answer them if possible. I got a question: what is an acceptable security budget in percentage if you compare the turnover? Depends the type of company, but really I think depends how far you already are. But usually we see around between 7 and 13% of the annual budget is dedicated for security. It may depend on which sector you have. Some sectors are more interesting for attackers, and you can see that government, healthcare, private banking, and everything financial is more of or being more attacked by attackers. So they should up their budget compared to other companies. But it's also depending, okay, what is today your security posture? What is already, if you're coming from almost zero, yeah, you will need to add more security budget. If you're already very compliant with all the necessary measurements, then it will be less. But I think 10% is not that much. I think 10% is like a sweet spot for most companies. So this is a very good one. What if a client refuses to make an investment? Are we responsible as an IT provider? There was a case of the gemeente, it's somewhere in the Netherlands, but it was a city in the Netherlands that actually tried to, they were attacked, they had ransomware, and they tried to get their money back from their IT provider. But the IT provider really documented the risk that they took by not investing in certain technology, or in this case, it was like opening RDP on the firewall. It was something that the IT provider said, this is not best practices. You will get breached. This is dangerous. Please acknowledge. So if your client refuses that, but you as an IT provider show them the risk and you document that, then you won't be responsible. Okay, this is best practice for the IT provider. On the other end, if you say, okay, let's outsource your security and we take all the burden, and you say they're secured, that could be a gray area. But I mean, you can outsource security, but you cannot outsource responsibility. So in the end, the customer is still also responsible. Okay, if I understand correctly, someone is asking for your supply chain, how to ensure that your supplier is compliant. Well, NIS2, you don't have a certificate for NIS2. You do have a certificate for ISO 27001, for example. So if you have that, you are quite sure that that company is compliant with most of the necessary stuff. So that certification would give you a good idea if your provider or your supplier is taking security seriously, and in that way he's compliant to work together. Yeah, another question is about someone who's saying that earlier we heard ISO certified label is sufficient as proof for NIS2 compliance. Based on what I heard today, that seems incorrect. Indeed, there's some controls that don't come into ISO. So if you already are ISO compliant, you are much further. I mean, it's like almost 80% of every control or question is already checking the box if you have ISO, but you're not 100% compliant yet. There's still some stuff. But this is well documented by the CCB, because every step they document also on CIS, ISO, and NIS framework. So you will get a view about what you still need to do manually or extra to be compliant with NIS2. Another question is, do the OT security department also do the complete NIS2 when the OT network is behind the IT network? Yes, indeed. If you have a SCADA environment, you also need to make sure you have an asset list. All the vulnerabilities should be there. You should have documented in place what happens when wherever attack occurs. So same level of security for IT should also be for your OT environment, even if it's behind the IT network, because attackers still move lateral. Most OT networks are not air-gapped. They're still accessed from third party because they need to work on specific material. They need to do an update or troubleshooting. So there's still remote access that needs to be regulated also. So yeah, OT security definitely is a part of this too. I understood that hospital was not considered as essential. No, because hospital already were a part of NIS1, and NIS2 healthcare is even broader. It's also for medical labs and a pharmaceutical-related company, actually. So hospitals are a part of essential already with NIS1. Good questions, but for a small or medium business, it will be complicated to reach ISO requirements, isn't it? It's an investment for sure, but we do see companies from like 200 employees, 100 employees, 150. We see them to ISO requirements, but it gets easier if you use the right tools. There are tools out there to help you with compliancy that are it's like step-by-step guides. They try to do API integrations to verify those controls, and in that point, an auditor doesn't have that much work anymore because you already provided all the groundwork. But it is an impact on every company, but it shouldn't be a burden. It will be an impact. You will have to spend man hours, but there are technologies out there to help and guide you with that. Okay, so those were all the questions I have right now. If you still have any questions, please do reach out. Thanks for joining us today. And you get almost 15 minutes back today. So enjoy that coffee. Thank you for joining us. Please come to our NetSec event. We would love to have you there. And until next time, thank you very much.